Anyone who has ever collapsed in grief while cradling the body of the person they love knows that exact feeling. It makes you question if time has actually stopped, and it leaves you with a lingering, hollow guilt just for being alive. Every breath you take feels like a betrayal of the one you lost. I never imagined it would happen again, but there she was, leaning against me on the backyard swing, her voice growing fainter as she whispered that she was tired and wanted to marry me one more time. I could only choke out a promise that she would always be my wife, in this life and the next, before her breathing finally stopped. Her body grew cold in my arms as I sobbed, until my eyes were swollen and my vision was blurred, yet I refused to let go. I knew that the moment I loosened my grip, she would be gone forever. My wife and I were both reborn, sent back to the days leading up to our wedding. This time, however, I was destined to be the one who left her standing at the altar. I was supposed to marry Olivia Hayes, the woman I had spent years loving from afar. She was the person I once believed was my soulmate. Yet in this moment, I wanted nothing more than to hurl myself out a window if it meant escaping the ceremony. I felt this way because I had already lived through this entire life once before. In my past life, Olivia and I were married for more than 2 decades. To everyone else, we were the quintessential model couple who remained as in love as the day we met. That perfect illusion finally shattered on the day of our 25th anniversary. She chose to take her own life, and she did it as part of suicide pact. The man who died by her side was Julian Vance. He was her old flame from her college days, the one she always considered the one who got away. Standing before her headstone, I whispered a question to the wind, asking if she had ever regretted marrying me for even a single second. I knew I would never get an answer, but I gave her mine anyway. I told her that I deeply regretted ever making her my wife. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back at the moment right before the ceremony was set to begin. I made a split-second decision to run away this time. In this life, we would be nothing more than strangers who happened to know too much about one another, and we would never be husband and wife again. I never expected her to track me down looking so gaunt, as if she had just returned from the brink of death. She came all that way just to tell me that she never regretted our marriage. She claimed she didn't regret it in that life or this one. She told me I was the only person she ever truly wanted to marry. I felt a tap on my shoulder and opened my eyes in a daze. Right then, the ballroom doors swung open and Olivia Hayes stepped inside. She was the woman who, in my memory, had been dead for a decade. Yet here, she was walking toward the stage. Dressed in a pristine white gown, she stood beneath the spotlight as if she were bathed in divine radiance. She looked breathtakingly unreal, like an angel who had just descended from the heavens. A wave of hushed gasps and whispers rippled through the rows of guests. The noise of the crowd soon drowned out the soft background music as every eye in the room fixed on her beauty. I was the only one there breaking into a cold sweat. Someone gave me a sharp nudge in the ribs, reminding me that I was supposed to walk up and greet my bride. I was the one who had insisted on this specific grand entrance during the wedding planning. Now, I could only stand there and stare at Olivia on the stage in a state of shock. She tilted her head slightly and offered me a small, knowing smile. Her smile only made my resolve harden. I spun around on my heel and bolted toward the exit at full speed. I screamed that the wedding was off and that there was no way in hell I was going through with it. The entire ballroom erupted into a frenzy. The Bridgewater Plaza was massive, and in my panic state, I couldn't even figure out which way the exit was. Before I could find my bearings, Olivia's friends and family were already hot on my heels. Her father, Mr. Hayes, looked absolutely livid with his brow furrowed in pure rage and disapproval. He told me that the wedding was starting and demanded that I stop this nonsense and get back inside to finish the ceremony. I shook my head violently, my stance completely unyielding. Part of me still couldn't believe that I had actually been reborn. It felt surreal that the moment I woke up, I was standing at the altar with Olivia all over again. Since fate had given me a second chance, I was not about to repeat my past failures. I was never going to marry Olivia Hayes again. One of my relatives stepped in to try and reason with me in an urgent, serious voice. He begged me to just finish the ceremony first regardless of what was wrong. He kept saying that Olivia was waiting for me. Those words echoed painfully in my mind. I caught a flash of white in the corner of my eye as she closed the distance rapidly. She was moving toward me like a homing missile. I knew I couldn't afford to hesitate for another second. I shoved a nearby window open and threw myself out from the third floor. Fortunately, there was an awning below that broke most of my fall. Despite that, as I scrambled to my feet, a sharp, stabbing pain surged through my spine, but that physical ache was nothing. It couldn't compare to the agony of being deceived by Olivia for over 20 years in my previous life. Clutching my side, I limped away as fast as I could, desperate to get away from that place. Hotel staff and guests were sticking their heads out of the windows, looking at me like they had just seen a ghost. People were shouting that I was insane for actually ditching my own wedding. Olivia was right there with them, her face a mask of pure panic and total disbelief. She cried out to ask what I was doing and what would happen to the wedding if I left. The Lucas from my previous life would never have dreamed of doing something like this. But that man was gone now. I looked up and called her name, my voice sounding surprisingly calm. I told her that choosing to marry her was the single greatest mistake of my life. I explained that I was there to finally set things right. I took a long pause to make sure everyone present heard me clearly. Then I added that she shouldn't be confused because I was the one dumping her. I didn't stick around to see how she reacted and instead hailed a cab immediately. I forced myself to look composed as I slid into the back seat. Even though my back was throbbing with every heartbeat, I refused to lose my dignity. I knew better than anyone that her pristine white gown was never meant for me. I was never the man she truly wanted to walk down the aisle toward. Memories began to crash over me like a tidal wave. I remember the day I rushed into the police station and the way the officer frowned as he spoke to me. He had asked if I knew a man named Julian Vance, the one who had died alongside my wife. In that moment, all I felt was a crushing sense of confusion and helplessness. It took me more than 20 years in my first life to see her for who she really was. I was determined not to be fooled by her ever again. I checked into Bridgewater General Hospital to get my injuries treated. My phone was practically exploding with activity, vibrating and ringing as a relentless stream of calls and texts flooded in. Nobody was calling to offer sympathy. Most of them were just waiting to tear into me, and the text messages I received proved it. One message demanded to know how I could treat Olivia so poorly, claiming she had cried until she passed out. It told me to get back there and apologize immediately. I just let out a cold laugh. Was I supposed to believe Olivia was actually upset that I left? Please, she was probably thrilled that I was gone. Now she and her precious Julian Vance could finally go off and live their happy ending together. They really should have been thanking me for giving them their freedom. I was enjoying those bitter thoughts when my hospital room door suddenly swung open. My parents were standing in the doorway with looks so grim they could have curdled milk. My father shouted my name and asked if I had lost my mind for running away and jumping out of a window. He asked if I was trying to humiliate them or if I just had a death wish. I hadn't expected them to track me down at the hospital so fast, and I instinctively tried to hide under my covers. I mumbled a quick apology and told them to be quiet because I was an injured man. I held up my bandaged arm with a pathetic look, hoping to get some sympathy out of them. It didn't work at all. They just scoffed and told me that I had brought this on myself. Then they informed me that I'd sent Olivia to the hospital too, and that I was going to have to make things right. That explained why they were so frantic. Olivia was certainly staying committed to her performance. By acting like the victim, she ensured that nobody would ever suspect she wanted out of the marriage just as much as I did. Then my parents handed down my sentence. They told me that as soon as I was discharged, I was going to marry Olivia. I told them that was never going to happen, and I didn't leave any room for argument. My bluntness caught them off guard. To them, the idea of me and Olivia getting married had always seemed like a perfect match. Back in the beginning, I had practically begged for this marriage. I had transferred to Olivia's school during my senior year and fallen for her the second I saw her. I spent 5 long years loving her from a distance. Everything changed when her family business, Hayes Innovations, started struggling. Her parents approached mine with a proposal to merge the companies through our marriage. I was overjoyed back then and did everything in my power to convince my parents to agree to the deal. But I'm a completely different man now than I was back then. They couldn't wrap their heads around my sudden change of heart. Suddenly, a woman's voice cut through the tension and asked why. My parents stepped aside to reveal Olivia standing there. She had traded her wedding gown for a hospital robe. She had always been thin, but now she looked so fragile that a strong breeze might knock her over. She looked like she was about to collapse. For a split second, I felt a sharp pang in my chest. It felt like I'd been stung by a sudden needle of pity or grief. She kept her eyes locked on mine and asked me again why I wouldn't marry her. I knit my brows and forced myself to stay cold. I told her it was because I didn't love her anymore. The moment the words left my mouth, all the strength seemed to leave her body. She swayed for a second before collapsing onto the floor. My parents gave me a look that could kill. They rushed to her side and followed the nurses as they wheeled her back to her room. There was a heartbeat where I almost went after them. I managed to stop myself just in time. I couldn't understand when Olivia had become so delicate. I wondered if it was just another part of her performance. Over the next few days, my parents were so furious with me that they stopped visiting me entirely. My friend Mark was the only one who showed up, and he gave me a big thumbs up the second he walked in. He told me I was a legend for pushing Olivia that far, especially since I used to be obsessed with her. He reminded me that I had spent years chasing her and was finally about to win her over when I suddenly bailed. I just waved him off dismissively. I told him that once it became too easy, I lost interest. She asked if she should try chasing me instead. I froze and looked toward the door. Olivia was standing there, having just been discharged, with a soft smile on her face. I told her flat out that I didn't want to see her. She didn't seem bothered by my rudeness at all as she walked in carrying a thermos. She expertly opened the container and began ladling out some soup. She told me she had made her famous chicken and vegetable soup just for me. She set the bowl down and told me to eat up while it was still hot. Mark could tell things were getting heavy and made a quick exit. I was left alone to glare at Olivia while I sat there with a blank expression. Olivia held the bowl out like she was trying to coax a toddler to eat. She told me to just smell how good it was. The familiar aroma filled the room. In our previous life, we were married for over 20 years. To the rest of the world, we were the perfect couple. For a long time, I actually believed that lie myself. She used to be so attentive to the little things. Even though she was always working and missing our holidays and anniversaries, she always made sure to apologize. She would always bring home a gift to make up for her absence. Those gifts were always exactly what I wanted. They were things I had either mentioned in passing or had been wanting for a long time. I had heard that Olivia, who grew up never having to lift a finger, had even taken cooking classes for me. Whenever she was home, she insisted on doing the cooking. She claimed she was worried about my digestion and spent time learning how to make healthy soups. This chicken and vegetable soup used to be my absolute favorite. I used to think those meals were proof that she loved me. But then I found out the truth. Just thinking about it made the soup in front of me seem repulsive. I turned my head away from the spoon she was holding out. I told her I didn't want any and that I didn't want to see her face. I told her to leave. Olivia bit her lip and started to tremble. It took her a moment to force a tight smile onto her face. She told me she would just leave it there for when I felt better. I didn't want to hear another word out of her mouth, so I pulled the covers over my head. There was a long silence, but she didn't leave. I could hear her moving quietly around the room, tidying up my things. I didn't emerge from the blankets until I heard the door click shut. The room was spotless. She had even gone out of her way to put a vase of fresh flowers right where I would see them. They were positioned so I couldn't miss them. I just scoffed at myself. She really was an incredible actress. Over the next few days, Olivia was like clockwork, showing up every morning, noon, and night. She brought home-cooked meals every single time. I ignored the food and treated her like she didn't even exist. She kept herself busy by making the hospital room look cozy. She was trying to make it look exactly like our first home from the other life. It only made me feel more disgusted. I waited until she left one afternoon and immediately checked myself out of the hospital. It was time to go home. I thought I would finally get some peace, but I was being naive. I had barely walked through the front door when Olivia showed up at my parents' house. She was being incredibly helpful, leaning over to give my father a shoulder massage. She told my parents that they should just call her whenever they felt stiff or sore. She promised to come over and give them a massage whenever they needed one. My parents saw me coming down the stairs and waved me over. They suggested she should give me a massage since I had just gotten out of the hospital. Olivia turned toward me with a hopeful look in her eyes. It was obvious that my parents had already picked a side. I knew exactly why they were doing it. They were absolutely charmed by Olivia. Before I realized who she really was, I had been fooled by that same sweet act. I found myself wondering what her angle was this time. It hit me all of a sudden. The only reason the Hayes family wanted this merger in the first place was because Hayes Innovations was going broke. Olivia was probably terrified that my family would pull the funding, which was why she was being so sycophantic. She was stressing herself out for nothing. In my previous life, Hayes Innovations had actually become quite successful after they got through their rough patch. It was a solid investment, no matter how you looked at it. Once I realized that, my perspective on Olivia shifted. I started looking at her more like a business opportunity than an ex, and my gaze softened slightly. My parents noticed a change in my expression and immediately shoved Olivia toward me. She lost her balance and stumbled into my chest like a leaf caught in the wind. I caught her by instinct. When my hands touched her, I was shocked. Even through her clothes, I could tell she had lost a significant amount of weight. She felt as light as a feather, almost as if she were hollow inside. It felt like she might break if I gripped her too hard. I couldn't help but frown. Olivia looked up at me with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes. She looked genuinely happy. I just felt irritated and pushed her away a bit more roughly than I intended. Olivia wobbled for a second before finding her footing, but she still looked delighted. My parents were looking at me like I was just playing hard to get and that I still secretly cared about her. I couldn't stand to be in that house for another minute. I told them I had plans and wouldn't be coming home that night. I grabbed my phone and headed for the door. Olivia was relentless and followed me outside immediately. Everywhere I went, she was right behind me. I was about to get into my car when she reached for the passenger side door. I snapped and told her that enough was enough. My voice was much louder than I intended. I asked her to please stop following me. Olivia froze where she stood, looking startled as her shoulders began to shake. The more vulnerable and weak she looked, the more annoyed I became. I told her coldly that I knew she was only after my family's money. I assured her that my family would still invest in her company even if we didn't get married. I asked if that was enough to make her leave me alone. She didn't say anything, so I just slammed on the gas and took off. Later, I was at the Ashton Club with a group of casual acquaintances who were busy gossiping about me ditching my own wedding. They were laughing about how I had chased the school beauty for years only to dump her at the altar. One of them said he always knew I wasn't the romantic type and that I was just playing games with her. They said she deserved the humiliation because she always acted like she was better than everyone else. They joked that it was normal for men to play around and that now it was her turn to be the one who got played. Hearing their nasty comments made me realize that by running away, I had turned Olivia into the biggest joke in our social circle. Her reputation as the untouchable golden girl had been completely destroyed. Now, everyone felt like they had the right to kick her while she was down. I didn't say a word and just kept drinking my whiskey. I didn't stumble home until late that night, barely able to walk straight. The lights were still on in the living room, and my parents were waiting for me with grim expressions. My father told me I was becoming a disgrace for staying out so late. He asked how I could just dump a girl as wonderful as Olivia. He reminded me that I was the one who had pushed for the marriage in the first place. He told me that I owed them a serious explanation for my behavior. Their words actually helped me sober up a bit. It was true that I'd spent years desperately trying to get her to marry me. It took a whole lifetime of suffering for me to realize that you can't force happiness. My mind drifted back to the day I found out that Olivia had died. It was our 25th wedding anniversary. The day before, I had tried to stand my ground for once and was giving her the cold shoulder. I didn't have a good reason. I just wanted her to be home for our anniversary. That day also marked 30 years since I had first fallen for her. I had threatened her with a divorce if she didn't come home. I'm sure she thought it was a joke at the time. I waited for her at a restaurant that night. actually hoping she would show up. Instead, I received a phone call telling me that she was dead. I hung up and raced to the police station. The officer confirmed my identity as Olivia's husband and looked at me with deep pity. They told me Olivia had killed herself. She had ended her life alongside another man, Julian Vance. The police suspected it was a suicide pact between lovers. They asked if I knew anything about Mr. Vance. That was the first time I had ever even heard his name. I just shook my head, my mind completely blank. I didn't find out who Julian Vance really was until her funeral. Her best friend was draped over the casket, sobbing uncontrollably. She cried out that if she had known Olivia loved Julian that much, she would have done anything to stop her from marrying me. That was when I learned that Julian had been her college sweetheart. The two of them had never actually stopped seeing each other. All those holidays and anniversaries she had missed were actually spent with him. When the funeral was over and everyone had gone, I was the only one left at her grave. I whispered to her headstone. I asked her if she ever regretted marrying me. The cold stone didn't give me an answer, but I already knew my own truth. I told her that I regretted marrying her too. I decided that if I ever got a second chance, I would stay as far away from her as possible. That thought brought me a strange sense of clarity. I looked back at my parents and told them firmly that I was not getting married. I said I couldn't explain why, but I promised to still help the Hayes family with their financial problems. My mother finally let out a long sigh and told me I would regret my decision eventually. She said they were done trying to convince me and that I was on my own. I went to my room and crashed, sleeping like a log. Once I felt a bit better, I sent Olivia and I a message asking her to meet me in my office. She showed up pretty quickly and was dressed to the nines. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she was wearing a white sundress, looking like she was headed for a romantic date. She told me with a shy little smile that it had been a long time since I had asked to see her like this. I just coldly tossed a contract onto my desk. In a professional tone, I told her I knew her company needed $60 million. I said if she signed the paper, the money was hers. I told her that in exchange, she had to stay out of my life for good. Olivia just looked down and didn't say a word. I impatiently told her to just sign the damn thing, saying I was giving her everything she wanted. I warned her not to be greedy and told her she should just take the money and be happy. Olivia looked up at me with tears welling in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and slammed the contract back onto the desk toward me. She lunged forward and grabbed me by my collar, forcing me to look her in the eye. She screamed that she had never been after the money. She asked if it wasn't obvious enough that she had always wanted me. Her tears were streaming down her face as she hammered her tiny fists against my chest, though it didn't hurt a bit. She reminded me that we had been married for 20 years. She asked how I could bully her like this when we had both been given a second chance. She told me I wasn't like this in our previous life. My frown deepened as the realization hit me. Olivia had been reborn too. That explained why everything felt so different, like her sudden ability to cook. In our first life, she hadn't even bothered to learn how to cook until we had been married for years. Since she was playing with the same knowledge I had, I decided there was no point in pretending anymore. I wiped all the emotion from my face and looked at her with a cold, hard stare. I told her to stop talking about the past life and said she knew exactly what she had done. I suggested that since we both remembered the past, we should just go our separate ways. I told her to leave me alone and promised I wouldn't stand in the way of her and her true love. I warned her to stop using the company's financial problems as an excuse to follow me around. She looked frantic and insisted that wasn't what was happening. She looked as pale as she had on the day she died. She tried to keep explaining herself, but the security guards I called finally arrived. They escorted her out of the building, half dragging her toward the exit. Once the mess was dealt with, I caught a flight out of the country the very next day. On paper, it was a business trip to look at new projects. In reality, I just wanted to get away from everything and spend some time enjoying my life on my own terms. I had sacrificed way too much for Olivia in my previous life. I had always scheduled my entire life around her busy career. I had barely traveled and rarely saw my friends just so I could be home whenever she decided to show up. I wanted to be there for her the moment she walked through the door. Even when she missed holidays and anniversaries, I would make excuses for her. I told myself that because everyone else was off, she had to work even harder to stay ahead. I told myself she was doing it for her dream of making the company successful. I lived in that delusional bubble of self-sacrifice for over 20 years. I had spent my life hallucinating that Olivia actually loved me. When the dream finally died, I realized just how pathetic I had been. I wondered if it was really worth wasting my best years on a woman who didn't care. No matter how much I tried to ignore her, someone would always post something about her on social media just to get a reaction. On Monday, someone posted that Olivia was being a total fake by hanging around my parents every day. They mentioned that I had clearly dumped her and left the country, yet she was still desperately clinging to my family. By Tuesday, there were posts about her showing up to a gala with my parents. People were saying she was acting like she was still going to be their daughter-in-law and wondered if my parents were actually falling for her act. On Wednesday, someone spotted her at Vortex, which was my favorite bar. People were wondering if she was there looking for me or if she was already hunting for her next victim. By Thursday, everyone was saying she had gone off the deep end. She was apparently searching for me everywhere, but wouldn't tell anyone what she wanted. The gossip died down for a couple of days, but then the local rumor mill started up again. Someone posted that Olivia had been hospitalized for the second time. Nobody in the group chat felt bad for her, and they just mocked her. They joked about her being back in the hospital and asked if she was faking it just to get my attention. They called her a master manipulator and said she was trying to blackmail me emotionally. I just watched the messages scroll past and felt a strange sense of calm as the conversation moved on to something else. I wondered why, if she really had been reborn, she didn't just go be with Julian Vance. This was her chance to finally have the grand romance they missed out on, so I couldn't understand why she was still bothering me. I had already sent the first part of the $60 million to her family account as promised. I wondered if she was just being greedy and wanted even more from me. In our previous life, she had total control over my family fortune after we got married. I had basically handed her the keys to everything, and it was worth way more than $60 million. I figured if she remembered our past life, her greed would be even worse now. I didn't buy the hospital story because I knew she was healthy enough to live a long life as long as she took care of herself. I was convinced it was all an act. I spent another month traveling around Europe and having a great time. Eventually, my mother started calling me nonstop and demanding that I come home, so I finally packed my bags and flew back. I never expected that the moment I walked off the plane at Bridgewater International Airport, I would run right into the one person I never wanted to see again. I let out an annoyed sigh. Olivia gave me a weak smile and told me she was there to take me home. I just turned my back and started walking as fast as I could with my suitcase trailing behind me. It didn't take long for me to lose her in the crowd. I was ready to call an Uber until I realized my mother was probably the one who sent her. I knew if I showed up alone, my mom would spend the entire night lecturing me. I decided to be the bigger person and waited outside the terminal for a few minutes. But the scene I saw next was not what I expected. Olivia walked out of the terminal side by side with a man. That man turned out to be Julian Vance. He was the man she supposedly loved. They were walking very close together and seemed way too comfortable with each other to be just friends. My mood soured as I watched them. I had never actually seen them together in our previous life, but now I was getting a front row seat to their relationship. I should have seen it coming, and I felt like an idiot for forgetting the lessons I'd learned the hard way. I let out a disgusted snort and got into my car to drive back to my parents' place. I could see my mother pacing by the front door from a block away. Her face dropped the moment she realized I was the only one getting out of the car. She demanded to know why I was alone and where Olivia was. She scolded me for leaving a young woman all by herself at the airport. Her voice got louder as she told me she was ashamed to have raised such a rude son. She said Olivia had been trying so hard to make things right with me. She asked what Olivia could have possibly done to deserve that kind of treatment. I knew that if my parents had any idea what Olivia had done to me in the past, they wouldn't be trying so hard to get us back together. It was a shame that I couldn't explain what had happened in my other life. Luckily, I finally had a legitimate excuse to give them this time around. I didn't hold back and told my mother that Olivia had shown up to get me, but she had brought her boyfriend along for the ride. I told her she was in love with Julian Vance, a guy from her college. I asked if they really wanted their son to keep chasing after a woman who clearly didn't want anything to do with him. I asked her if she even cared about my feelings at all. My words seemed to stun her into silence. She stammered that it couldn't be true. She insisted that Olivia couldn't love someone else because of what she had told her in private. She spent a long time thinking about everything I'd done recently. Even though she loved Olivia, she still knew her own son better than anyone else. She knew I wouldn't treat a woman like that unless something was seriously wrong. Once she realized that, she offered me an awkward, apologetic smile. She told me she was sorry and that she had no idea Olivia was seeing someone else. She admitted she was wrong and told me to just come inside. She mentioned that I probably hadn't had a good home-cooked meal in a while and promised to make me dinner. That night, I finally felt the warmth of my mother's love again. I also got some good news because once my mother saw the light, she blacklisted Olivia and told security not to let her into the neighborhood. Olivia wasn't the type to give up without a fight. She started staking out all my favorite spots, trying to corner me. Even my friends were starting to be impressed by her persistence. Mark sent me an iMessage telling me that she had shown up again. He told me she looked half dead, but had incredible stamina, warning me that she might actually outlast me. He suggested I come out and have some fun instead of hiding at home. I was bored out of my mind and felt like I was rotting in that house. After a bit of thought, I decided to meet everyone at Vortex. Olivia was a snob when it came to her surroundings. I knew she would hate a place like Vortex with its loud music, flashing lights, and the overwhelming smell of sweat and alcohol. The bass was thumping in my chest, and the dance floor was packed as everyone enjoyed themselves. I was actually having a good time until I saw someone who definitely didn't belong there. It was Olivia. She was like a ghost I couldn't shake, a disaster that kept following me no matter where I tried to hide. Her frail body pushed through the crowd until she was standing right in front of me. She grabbed my arm with her thin hand and tried to pull me toward the exit with all her might. She was way too weak to move me, so I just stood there. Finally, she looked up at me with a look of pure desperation in her eyes. She begged me to just give her one more chance to explain herself. She promised that if I listened to her and still didn't want her around, she would disappear forever. Her eyes were welling up, but she was fighting to keep from crying. She pleaded with me one last time. In our entire previous life, I had never once seen her shed a tear. I used to think she was either incredibly tough or just had a heart of stone. But in this life, I had already seen her break down twice. It was as if she was finally willing to show me how vulnerable she really was. That was something I'd spent my entire past life wishing she would do. I hadn't wanted her to deal with everything by herself, but she always insisted on carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She should have known she could lean on me. I had wanted to scream at her that I was her husband. As I looked at her crying, she started to look like the woman I had spent years imagining she could be. I finally gave in and let her lead me out of the club. I told her in a low voice that this was her absolute last chance. We found a quiet spot, but Olivia just sat there and sobbed for a long time. She was shaking so hard that she couldn't even get a full sentence out. I forced myself to be patient and waited for her to calm down. After what felt like forever, she finally managed to catch her breath. She looked at me with eyes full of grief and finally told me that after she died in our past life, her spirit had never left my side. She claimed she had heard every word I said at her grave. My mind went completely blank. Being reborn was crazy enough, but now she was telling me her ghost had been stalking me? It was too much for me to process. What she said next was even more shocking. She claimed that in our previous life, her body had been possessed by something from another dimension. She told me that the entity's goal was to be with Julian Vance. Apparently, Olivia's own will was so strong that the thing could never fully take over her mind. She said that whenever she regained even a little bit of control, her only thought was to come home to see me. She had been fighting that thing for control of her own body for over 20 years. She explained that just as she was about to win her body back, the entity realized it had failed. It decided to use her body to kill both itself and Julian. She said that once her body was gone, her spirit was finally free to be with me. She told me she had been by my side every single day after her death, even though I couldn't see her. She said she had seen all my pain and that it had broken her heart too. She admitted that she knew how much I hated the woman she had become. She swore that she wasn't the one who had hurt me. She insisted that the real Olivia Hayes had never loved anyone but me. Her story left me completely baffled. I couldn't wrap my head around talk of systems, interdimensional entities, and our rebirth. She said our second chance was actually a form of compensation for her body being stolen. She claimed she had made a deal with the system to allow us to be reborn. She told me that my rebirth was part of the deal she had made. I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me desperately wanted to believe her and accept her explanation. But the logical part of my brain still struggled to separate the woman I had known from the person she was describing. The pain and humiliation I'd suffered were real, and I couldn't just forget them. Olivia seemed to realize that I wasn't ready to forgive her yet and gave me a sad smile. Her smile looked like she was saying goodbye for good. She told me she had one final wish. She mentioned the question I had asked at her grave and said she wanted to give me her answer in person. She told me that she had never regretted marrying me, not once in either of our lives. She said I was the only person she had ever truly wanted to be with. Her voice was thick with grief and longing. She looked at me one last time, as if she were trying to memorize every detail of my face. Then, she turned around and started to walk away with heavy, slow steps. A second later, she suddenly collapsed onto the ground with a sickening thud. I rushed over and saw that she was completely unconscious. I had spent so much time telling myself I didn't care about her anymore. But my body moved before I could think, and I was by her side in an instant. My voice was shaking as I called out to her. I asked her what was wrong and begged her not to scare me. I couldn't understand how she could be this ill. I remembered her being so healthy in our other life. I kept calling her name, but she didn't move. Her eyes were squeezed shut as if she were in agony. I felt a surge of pure panic as I realized how much trouble she was in. I was shaking as I lifted her up. She was so light that it was terrifying, almost like she was wasting away. She was even thinner than the last time I'd seen her. I felt like something precious was slipping away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. A dull ache started to spread through my chest. Olivia remained unconscious for a long time after her collapse. We rushed her to Bridgewater General, and the doctors ran a battery of tests. When they finally came back to talk to me, they looked grim and told me she had advanced pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt completely numb, as if the blood had drained out of my body. I probably knew more about that disease than the doctors did. I knew it so well because it was exactly what had killed me in my previous life. I had only lasted 3 months after I was diagnosed. I couldn't understand why this was happening to Olivia. She had always been so healthy in my past. In my memory, she had never even caught a cold in 20 years. Yet in this life, everything was different. Now she was dying of cancer. I wondered if this was the price we had to pay for changing our fates. I wondered why I was perfectly fine if she was suffering. It took 3 days before she finally opened her eyes. I hadn't left her side once and had spent the entire time holding her hand. Every time she shifted, I would bolt awake from my half-sleep. I nervously asked her how she was feeling. Her eyes were cloudy and filled with tears. She asked if this was real and if I had actually forgiven her. She said she was afraid it had all just been a dream. She was as pale as a ghost. But for the first time in a long time, her eyes were bright and focused on me with a desperate intensity. She looked so fragile that I was afraid she would just vanish. I pulled her close and held her as tight as I could. I apologized for being so stubborn and for pushing her away. I promised her that I would never do it again. I realized I had been punishing her for all the things the entity had done in our previous life. It wasn't her fault at all. She had been a victim too, trapped inside her own body while someone else controlled it. I knew that her suffering must have been even worse than mine. She leaned against me and looked like she was about to drift off again. Finally, she whispered something in my ear. She told me she wanted to go home and asked me to take her there. The doctors told me that her cancer was spreading fast. They said she might have a month left if we were lucky. They wanted her to stay in the hospital for treatment, but Olivia refused to spend her last days in a cold hospital room. I took her back to the house we had shared in our previous life. Being back there seemed to lift her spirits almost immediately. She started to look a bit healthier, but I knew she was just putting on a brave face. Once night fell and the house was quiet, I knew the pain would come back to haunt her. She would toss and turn in bed, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. But we both knew that the kind of pain she was in didn't just go away. She spent every night wide awake and in agony. I would lay right next to her and pretend to be asleep while I cried into my pillow. My side of the bed was soaked with tears, but I never let her see me cry. It was torture watching the woman I loved go through so much pain. I recognized every symptom and every spasm because I'd felt them all before. But every morning when the sun came up, we would both act like everything was fine. We would go about our day as if the night hadn't happened. Olivia would give me a smile and go into the kitchen to make me soup. I was the one doing all the actual work like chopping and cooking. She would just sit there and tell me what to do, occasionally taking a sip to check the flavor. Once she was happy with the taste, she would watch me until I finished the entire bowl. I told her that her soup was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I told her I wanted to drink her soup for the rest of my life. She just smiled and promised that she would keep making it for me. We both knew that forever was going to be a lot shorter than we had hoped. It felt cruel because we had already wasted our entire first life together. Now that we finally understood each other, we were about to be separated by death again. Eventually, the pain got so bad that she couldn't even move during the day. I would carry her out to the backyard, and we would sit on the swing together. She would just lean against me with her eyes closed. I would tell her all the embarrassing things I did to get her attention when we were seniors. She would laugh so hard that she would start coughing. Once she caught her breath, she told me she had a secret of her own. I realized then just how much she had been keeping to herself all those years. She had been carrying everything around. This time, the secret she shared seemed small, but it changed everything for me. She told me she had known about all the sweet things I had done for her in high school. She said those little things were the reason she had fallen so deeply in love with me. She said that nobody had ever been that good to her. I couldn't help but cry as I listened to her. Her voice started to fade until I could barely hear her. She told me she was tired and that she just wanted to marry me one more time. She told me she loved me, and I tried my best to keep my voice from shaking. I told her she was already my wife and that she was the only one for me in this life. I told her I loved her too. A soft breeze rustled the leaves in the trees above us. A few dead leaves drifted down from the branches. They drifted slowly to the ground as Olivia closed her eyes and took her final breath in my arms. I just sat there holding her for a long time. Eventually, I broke down and started sobbing like a lost child. I couldn't understand why we couldn't just have a normal, quiet life together. I don't know how long I sat there crying until my eyes were raw and my vision was blurry. That was when I saw it. A strange point of light seemed to be floating out of Olivia's body. It began to drift slowly up toward the sky. I reached out and caught it in my hand. Suddenly, a weird mechanical voice started speaking inside my head. The voice told me to let go and claimed it was some kind of nervous system. I was shocked to realize that this thing had been inside Olivia the whole time. I wondered if it had killed her. I stared at the light in my hand and asked it in a cold voice if it would respond to me. I demanded to know if it had hurt Olivia and why. I threatened to destroy it right then. I squeezed my hand shut and the system actually started screaming. It claimed it was all a misunderstanding and said Olivia had chosen to trade her health for my life. It explained that her body couldn't handle the disease as well as mine could, which was why it had killed her so quickly. I was stunned to realize that Olivia had sacrificed herself to save me. I felt completely empty as I sat there in shock. Then, a wave of pure agony washed over me as the reality of her death hit me. The pain of losing her was almost more than I could bear. I started to wonder if I should just end it. Just then, the system spoke up again. It said it was tired of both of us being so stubborn. It complained about losing out on the deal, but said it was going to do something about it. It told us that we were both going to have to work for it in the next life. I had no idea what it was talking about. I wanted to ask more questions, but I suddenly felt dizzy. The world around me started to fade into darkness. My last thought was that I was finally dying again. I felt relieved because I was finally going to be with Olivia. Everything went black. Then I started to hear the sound of people talking. I could see light starting to filter through my eyes. When I opened my eyes, I was back in high school. The bell had just rung, and a teacher was leading me into the classroom. The teacher introduced me as a new transfer student and asked me to say a few words to the class. I ignored the teacher and started looking around. I was searching for the girl who had haunted my dreams for so long. I saw her sitting in the third row. Olivia Hayes looked exactly like she did back then, so young and innocent. This was our very first meeting. She looked up and our eyes locked. She gave me a beautiful, pure smile, and it felt like we were the only two people in the room. In that moment, she was the only thing I could see. I said hello to everyone. My voice was strong and filled with all the hope I had gathered over our many lives. I told them my name was Lucas Miller. Then I looked right at her and made a promise. I told her that if she was okay with it, I wanted to spend this life and every life after that by her side. Ethan and Olivia's journey reminds us that beneath every painful misunderstanding often lies a sacrifice we haven't yet discovered. We frequently carry the weight of the past, forgetting that forgiveness is the only bridge to a future worth living. You don't need a second life to find peace. You only need the courage to look at those you love with new eyes today, replacing judgment with a gentle realization that we are all just trying to protect each other in the storms no one else can see.